The Trivium, Grammar, Rhetoric, and Logic. And in our part three and final part two, speaking about logic today, I want to address and do a deeper dive into how everyone thinks that they are right. And this is a topic that I try to cover in the previous episode on the part two of logic. However, I'm really trying to keep to the 1 hour or less mark with some of these different live streams, most of them at this point. And so I figured that I was just going to cover it later on in this part three. So this is going to be the third and final part to this series, specifically on logic. And it's essentially just about trying to address how I used to really think that talking was able to be a way to overcome problems. That essentially conventional wisdom was that if you had a problem to talk about it. However, it's become really apparent to me how much trust that someone has to have in the other party and another person, if you will, in order to really be able to have a productive conversation with said other party. And so if that's not the case, then the conversation's basically finished before it even started. And I covered some of the different elements of this with some of the other shorts that I have created. For example, talking about the conflict resolution, conflict resolution matrix or conflict management styles, and how essentially some people can really compete, particularly if they have a disagreement. Some people, when they are being disagreed with or if they are challenged, they really do not like being challenged. They construe disagreement as an attack, and then they can respond to an attack with aggression. So then therefore essentially it turns into a fight, it turns into antagonism. You're being competitive and you're not being cooperative or collaborative in that regard. So with that being said, I just think that that can be really unfortunate, especially like I was saying, if someone, if there is not, if there isn't really that much trust in the other person that you're speaking to, your interlocutor, if you will, then they can really just lie a lot to defend their position. Again, like they are being challenged, they construe the disagreement as an attack. And so now they have a fortress that's around their position, and they can really lie and be quite delusional, or at the very least, delusionally disingenuous, or even knowingly knowingly extreme. Like, just what it is that I'm trying to say essentially is that some people will literally argue that, anything is possible, essentially. And for example, that they would be able to lift up a tree that's falling down, timber, and that they're able to just to stop the tree from hitting the ground. I haven't explicitly heard someone say this, but the anything is possible. It's like you can't breathe underwater, and then some people would say scuba diving. It's like I'm pretty sure that I could create the conditions where someone would not be able to breathe underwater. That you can't turn back time, for example, among other factors. Of course, there are technological developments. Some people would even purport or assert that I'm too close-minded. But I mean, can you breathe in space? Some people would be like, oh, yeah, spaceship. Like, I think that that is being very nitpicky and very much so cherry picking examples to try to disqualify the statement that I'm making, because I just think that it is, again, I could create the conditions where someone cannot breathe in space, but I'm not really going to get into all of these semantics and really like tailor my phrasing so that it's able to establish those conditions. I think that that can be really semantically reductive, essentially. However, that being said, so for a number of reasons, I just think that that can be very difficult to it makes it very difficult to have conversations with some of these different people. And especially when it comes to philosophy, I actually am very much so into philosophy. There's a lot of that that I'm really trying to address with this channel and am able to hopefully build a community around it. However, one of the issues that I'm running into in that regard is that, or not specifically with this channel, but just generally throughout my life, is that everyone thinks that they're right. So, generally speaking, there's going to be a number of different philosophies that are adopted by different people. And as a byproduct, then we're not really able to agree on those different philosophies. And then that extends down to it. I find it very difficult to be able to have philosophical conversations with people who have a drastically different worldview or different, like, fundamentals in the way that they perceive and interpret this lifestyle. One such example, I am secular essentially. I mean, I I can't outright say with authority that God or religion doesn't exist, but I'm I pursue my life as if they don't, and to interact. So I am atheist, agnostic at most, if you will, and to interact with someone who does believe in God or who does believe in religion as well. To interact with people like that, I just find to be very, on a philosophical level, I find that to be very difficult because we're literally, it's almost as if we're not living in the same universe. It's like we're not living in the same existence. We're not living in the same reality because our concept of reality is just so drastically different that it's difficult for us to be able to meet somewhere where we could have a productive conversation. So, I mean, albeit I think that it's unfortunate, it be what it be. That being said, speaking of which, as it were, wanted to, as I like to usually do, just celebrate some of the progress of the channel. Of course, YouTube is the home base. If you're watching this, you're going to be watching it from YouTube. 15 subscribers as of right now. One video that managed to get over 500 views, and there we go. So I am extremely proud of that. 500 views. That is the. Please try and speak more honorable. That is the most watched video on my channel as of right now. So I'm very happy with that. Some other videos that have gotten 400 plus views, 300, 200 plus views, and so on and so forth. And, just keeping up with the content grind, trying to make the most of 2025, as it were. 15 subscribers. So there you have it. And of course, the description, unveiling and addressing the mechanics of people, interpersonal interactions, societal influences, and life in general, because throughout my life, many people would claim that intangibles are not quantifiable and that situations in life just happen, and that it is impossible to be articulated or put into words. That never sat well with me. Hence, here I am sharing some of what I've discovered while continuing to learn more along the way, and also while not letting the behaviors of the Homo sapien species as a whole off the hook. Some people that inspire my content include Robert Greene, Ryan Holiday, or the Daily Stoic, Mark Manson, Chris Williamson, Dr. Ryan Teraban, or Psychax, Jennifer Brick, Crash Course, and more. As you can see, these are just some of the different links. I'll take you over to the Instagram as well. And I'll even just make an opening for the TikTok too, so that then that is easier for me to switch between. And so looking at the Instagram, there's been some progress on the Instagram as well, particularly if I look at the Reels tab, you'd be able to see that one Reel has over 500 views as well. So I'm very proud of myself for that. Another Reel has over 300. So I'm really starting to break more of that over 200 view threshold. Almost managed to get over 200 views with my last Reel as well. So really trying to make some progress over there on Instagram. 0 followers though, so I encourage you to go and follow the Instagram. And then of course there was also TikTok. Now unfortunately the algorithm has not been doing me as much justice ever since the TikTok shutdown that happened in January. However, I'm still trying to make some progress. I have the most followers on this platform, and even likes technically, than any other platform that I have. And so you notice that there was really a drop off where I was even just getting consistently over like 600 or even over 800 in some of these different videos that I was doing. 840 right there, 802, 802, and 803, so on and so forth. So I was able to tap into that, but I mean, no pun intended. But what I'm just trying to say is that I'm still trying to make the most of the situation, despite there being less algorithmic momentum for me ever since the TikTok shutdown. So, I mean, doing what it is that I can. Hopefully, I'm able to transform this into more, essentially. But that being said, I wanted to certainly hit the ground running with the video of everyone thinks they are right. So wanting to get into that immediately and then do some commentary on top of that.
I feel like new sunglasses, like a brand new pair of jeans. Brand new.
Learn more about Celebrity Cruises' latest offers.
I thought that I was going to be over it.
Everybody.
So just on that, I mean, it be what it be. You know, I do happen to have a smaller channel, and this is not my personal channel, so I don't have YouTube Premium on this account. And so as a byproduct of that, that I am going to be in the situation where I'm going to be running into ads. I mean, I like my sunglasses. I wouldn't mind having a new pair of sunglasses as well. And that I certainly do respect, having a new pair of jeans, going on cruises. Those were one of my favorite types of vacations when I was younger, and I'd like to do a vacation like that again, but that is a different story. That being said, here I am with just trying to navigate YouTube, and I have the video now ready and loaded, and so let's hear it out.
He thinks they're right.
You have a worldview. You're presented with evidence that conflicts with the worldview, so you either have to change your worldview, which is hard because you've lived your whole life with it, or you just dismiss the evidence and dismiss the authority.
So yeah, everybody thinks that they're right, and so this is what I definitely do think is very disappointing when trying to talk to different people, because as I was saying before, disagreement can be construed as an attack, essentially. And some people can even be threatened by a different idea, or thinking that, oh, like, if they're disagreeing with me, then either they're judging me or that they think that I'm wrong, essentially, which in some cases, yes, some cases, no. I mean, in a lot of ways, I just don't want to necessarily purport to be a social media know-it-all or to think that I'm right. There certainly are different factors of life and elements of life that I've discovered, and a lot of those that I've discovered are not necessarily overtly spoken about in general discourse, unless you're going into particular places on the internet to find it, from what I've learned, such as, say, for example, outside of going on the internet, I do find it very difficult to, generally speaking, maybe if I went to a bar or something like that, to find people who essentially would agree that working for a boss is a form of slavery, essentially, in the sense that if there's two people who are interacting with an idea adversarially, albeit I think that's unfortunate. And so therefore they're trying to get their way, such as it's you versus your boss. You're always going to lose because the boss always has more power. Whoever has more power wins and gets what it is that they want in that dynamic. And so therefore there's a number of different content that I've seen, say Jennifer Brick, for example, which talks about effectively not trying to argue with your boss or trying to opt for win-win outcomes, essentially. And but I would take that to even further. And there are some people on the internet that are saying this, on YouTube at the very least, that are saying this. One person I like to reference, Philosophical Gamer, But it's essentially that you have to be a slave to an extent, and I think that that's extremely unfortunate. I think that that's extremely unfortunate. But you have to be a slave, because if you're not being a slave, and particularly a good slave, you know, then they're essentially like jobs want you to do as you're told. And if they don't really want people that are going to challenge them and the way that they operate. So it doesn't make you a good slave, and then they'll just try to find somebody else. So I think that that's very unfortunate, but nonetheless. Then there's also, you have a worldview, then you have conflicting evidence, so you can change your worldview, which is hard for people, right? Part of the reason why I do want to be willing to criticize people in general, because I don't think that this is just okay. And then there's it, so you could change your worldview, or you could deny the conflicting evidence. So that being said,
What makes sense to the universe is not the same as what makes sense to us. And we can't impose our beliefs on the universe.
If I was going to teach my students how to think critically, what are the key points? Like just basic questions they could ask.
I'd like to keep an open mind.
So I'm just going to address that. I mean, what makes sense of the universe is not necessarily consistent with your beliefs. So say, for example, I believe that I can smoke cigarettes and that I'll be completely fine. I mean, no, this is what I mean, where some people have this belief that they believe in the ad populum fallacy, that essentially they have enough faith in people that if there is a belief that has been held by a majority of people, and even consistently over time, that it must be correct, and that people are good enough to have been able to work out what is ideal, essentially, or what is right. And I don't think that that's true at all. No matter how many people agree with it across time. I mean, literally, slavery was considered to be, in the 19th century, was very popular, and even beyond then, be like further in the past. So essentially, what it is that I'm just trying to say is that I think that that's really ridiculous and unfortunate, that that would be a conclusion that some people would take. And going back to the cigarettes example, like, no matter how many people believe it, it just doesn't make it true. The laws of the universe, just of what is reality, that's always going to that's always going to win in that regard. And so it goes back to breathe underwater, breathe in space, turn back time, all of that, you know. So with that being said, let's hear what Lawrence Krauss has to say.
But not so open that my brains fall out. And that's the key point. We can't we have to skeptically assess the information we receive. We can't be gullible, because when we get a lot of information, it's absolutely certain that some of that information is wrong. And so we have to always filter what we get. And we have.
So I find that to be very interesting. So I want to be open-minded, but not to the extent where my brain falls out. And to be frank, I always struggled with the understanding of that particular quote. However, I have a greater understanding of that, essentially, in that if you're so open-minded, it's almost like you kind of lose your concept of reality, at the very least, in terms of, if I'm so open-minded, I can lose my sense of what is in fact real and what isn't real, essentially. So I don't want to be so open-minded that all of a sudden then it's like I've lost my grip on reality, essentially. And even then, that's only ever going to be filtered through my own perspective, but nonetheless. than not believing everything that you think. I mean, some people could be mistaken, and some people could just be wanting to F with you. And as sinister as I think that that is, that they just want to F with you, albeit I think that that's unfortunate. Like, some people just really are like that, and they consider that to be extremely funny. So I think that that's really too bad. But nonetheless, so really I think that at the end of the day, you just really have to trust yourself, because the only person that you can trust 100% is you, and the only person that has your back 100% is you.
We have to ask ourselves the following question: how open does my brain have to be to accept that information? Does it have to fall out? And by that I mean, when someone tells you something, you have to ask, is this consistent with my experience? Is it consistent with the experience of other people around me? And if it isn't, then probably there's a good reason to be skeptical.
So just even on that alone, yeah, absolutely. Like, literally what he's saying, that I should be skeptical of information that seems very wild to me. I've been making a few videos that were in follow up to Crash Course Philosophy episode 27. And that has to do with Paul Grice and Grice's maxims, essentially, and the cooperative principle. And in particular, when addressing the maxim of quality, that generally, excuse me, people shouldn't be saying lies. And I would agree with that. And that people flaunt the maxim of quality or break the maxim of quality, and they lie to be sarcastic, to try to make a communicative point, as it were. And so flouting the maxim or lying, where essentially the content doesn't match the context, essentially. So asking someone what's the temperature outside, and if it's in the middle of the winter, and they say that they're giving me a summer temperature instead of like a winter temperature, or asking, like, uh how um how bad is the rain outside, and it's like, oh no, it's not raining. And just some people, like, their sense of humor is just I mean, I can't say that I am. I just think that some people just lie a lot, basically. And I generally think that sarcasm should be used when there's a certain level of rapport with the person, but regardless.
Skeptical about it is probably wrong. If it makes predictions that also appear to be in disagreement with things that you observe around you, you should question it. And so we should never take anything on faith. That's really the mantra of science, if you want. That faith is the enemy of science. We often talk about a loss of faith in the world today.
And I mean, I like to just highlight, because I just want to know just that this video is, yeah, so this is approaching 4 years old in that regard. So yeah, I mean, I just find it very important. This is literally what I was saying in the earlier part of this video, in the first 10 minutes, about the extent to which we need to trust somebody else in order to have a meaningful conversation. I think it's very unfortunate, and yet it be what it be. Literally, nope. It be what it be. It's mirrored, so I oftentimes make that mistake, but nonetheless.
You don't lose anything by losing faith, okay? What you gain is reality. And so skepticism plays a key role in science, simply because we also are hardwired to want to believe. We're hardwired to want to find reasons for things. In the ancient...
And yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. Generally speaking, we want to believe what people say. Generally speaking, I would agree with that. And so I definitely have had to work on it for myself, to just not necessarily take all of what people say at face value. And then also I had to work on trying to navigate other people. And frankly, as extreme as this may sound, survive other people. And what that means for me is that surviving other people in terms of people have this entitlement. They're in there's a certain level of they're entitled to being trusted. And so for me to say I don't trust somebody else like out point blank, that generally is responded that's perceived or construed as an attack and then responded with aggression, like, what, you don't trust me? Ah! Kind of like mentality, which I think is ridiculous given how much deception there is in that people just lie so much. But nonetheless, it be what it be, right?
In the savannah in Africa, the trees reasons for things. In the savannah in Africa, the trees could be rustling, and you could choose to say, well, there's no reason for that, or maybe it's due to a lion. And those individuals who thought there might be no reason never lived long enough to survive to procreate. And so it's not too surprising we want to find explanations for everything.
So essentially, he's saying on an evolutionary biology perspective that the people who were more paranoid, they ended up propagating, they ended up having offspring. And so that led to the way that we are now. Those were some of the traits that survived, essentially, or that lasted, essentially.
And we create them if we need to satisfy ourselves, because we need to make sense of the world around us. And what we have to understand is that what makes sense to the universe is not the same as what makes sense to us. And we can't impose our beliefs on the universe. And the way we get around that inherent bias is by constantly questioning both ourselves.
So I really like that. Like, what makes sense to the universe is not necessarily what makes sense to us, and vice versa. And yes, we do have a bias in that regard. And so, and that's generally also just part of the human ego, frankly. In which case, I do think that there's certain parts about ego where that I do think that ego does have a productive place, because once again, I mean, nobody's going to care about you 100% but you. So it's up to you to assert yourself. It's up to you to defend yourself and advocate for yourself. Yet at the same time, I do think that people can be particularly narcissistic as well. And that we only really care about ourselves to an extent.
And all the information we receive from others is by constantly questioning both ourselves and all the information we receive from others. That's what we do in science, and it works beautifully in the real world as well.
The problem is that.
And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that. I definitely do think that it is worthwhile to not think that, like, you know everything. Like, no one truly knows, even though unfortunately people behave that way. No one truly knows. And then that by extension, then the other person, the people that you're talking to, they don't truly know either. So with all of that being said, I do think that that is very important to address, very, very important, but nonetheless, and very important to navigate your life and to be skeptical of the information that you're receiving, but and hence critical thinking, but nonetheless.
None of us has the truth. The only way to find out that if you're deceiving yourself or not, if you've gone off the rails, if you're wrong in some way, is to listen to other people who disagree with you. I started encountering other people that disagreed with me. We never went to the moon people, conspiracy people, whatever. And I thought, okay, so how do we know if I don't know what's coming down the pike, say in 10?
So I find that to be very interesting. I think that that is very nice on paper, but in practice, I just think that people, Homo sapiens, humans, that they handle disagreements in such an abysmal and primitive manner. I really genuinely do. And that is a shot. But I mean, I'm not like hating for the sake of hating. Like, I really do think that there is a lack of maturity, a disproportionately perceived antagonism, paranoia in some people's cases. and that there is a real lack of civility in the way that people disagree, even to the modern day, even in 2025. I think that there's a really, really horrible way in practice. I think it's really horrible the way that people just disagree, and how the interaction of different ideas is often very adversarial, among other factors. So I like the idea in practice, and to always be critically thinking, to always be not assuming that you have it all down pat, that you know it all, and being open to other information. But I definitely just don't think that people do that very productively. So I don't know how much of this is very wishful thinking. Essentially, it's like, oh, like, these people should know better. These people should have the awareness, and then they should be trying to not operate like this. But I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily ever going to change in our lifetime. Maybe. I'm hoping that I can make a difference with this podcast. I'm hoping I am, but at the same time, I also want to raise awareness of how that's not necessarily so easily said, easily done, despite it being easily said.
10 years from now, if I was going to teach my students how to think critically, what are the key points, like just basic questions they could ask? So it begins with one, how reliable is the source of the claim? Here's the claim. How reliable is it? What's the evidence for it? What's the quality of the evidence?
And here we go with getting up there. And so, as I've been saying,
Where does it come?
like, I don't have a YouTube Premium, but nonetheless, there's an ethos argument that's made there, and I would have covered rhetoric before, as one of the liberal arts: ethos, pathos, and logos. So there's the ethos before, like, how credible is the source per se. That being said, I don't really like the appeal to authority side of that necessarily. I don't think that someone needs to be a basketball player to criticize basketball. I don't think that someone needs to be married in order to criticize marriage. I don't think someone needs to be a parent in order to criticize parenting. But at the same time, I do think that there is a lot of merit to ethos in terms of the trustworthiness or the bias that's associated with some people. So, for example, as I was saying earlier in the live stream, if I was to try to talk to someone about religion and they were religious, I find it to be difficult to trust that they would be willing to no longer be religious, essentially. So, with that being said, then there's also what's the quality of the information as well. There's some logos as well in that regard. So that's also a factor too. And let's hear what else Michael Shermer has to say.
Come from? Who said that? Is this some fake news alternative site thing, or is it the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times? I mean, the source really matters. Has anyone tried to disprove the claim? This is super important because everybody thinks they're right, and every website has testimonials about this product or that idea. The question is not what do your supporters think, but what do the people who don't agree with you think?
And I agree with that. I agree with definitely not only necessarily looking at some of the people who support the claim, but like other people who disagree with the claim. And I don't know how much of this is wishful thinking on my part, but I really do hope that there's a difference is able to be made in terms of just encouraging more civil conversation. I literally have gone over the rules of civil conversation earlier in parts 1 and part 2, and that they're able to result in more productive conversation and more productive disagreements. I hope so, but I don't know.
That's what I want to know. Has anyone run an experiment to try to disprove your theory? And so in science, this is as basic as it gets. Karl Popper called this the principle of falsification. That is, we can't ever prove a theory correct, but we can disprove it by having an experiment that shows it's wrong. Okay, so if you can't falsify it, what are you really doing? And my favorite story on this, by the way, let me just have a little side.
So before he gets into that story, yeah, I mean, I just think that there's just a lot of merit to that. This whole notion of, excuse me, first time that I sneezed while recording content. I am human, but that being said, just that people, you can't really prove a claim correct, but you could just in some cases. I think that it depends. That you could almost like kind of consistently create fire, for example, per se. But yeah, disproving it, and then that's when you know that it's incorrect as well. Yeah, I mean, I definitely do agree with that too. So, all that being said, let's hear what his side note is.
Sidetrack here from Carl. He's got this great little section in his book, Demon Haunted World. There's a dragon in my garage. Okay, I have a dragon in my garage. You want to see it? Come here, let me show you. So I pull up the garage door. I go, look, can you see the dragon? And you look in there, you go, well, no, I don't see anything. Sorry. This is an invisible dragon.
Yeah, I really like this example, but I'm just not trying to run into copyright. So I am just interfering every now and then, but let's continue to hear.
An invisible dragon. Yeah. He's invisible. Well, what if we put some flour on the ground and then we'll get the footprints of the dragon? Well, no, see, this is a special dragon that hovers above the ground. It floats. It's an invisible floating dragon. An invisible floating dragon. Okay. Oh, wait, I have some infrared cameras here. We can detect the heat from the dragon. No, see, this is a cold-blooded dragon. It doesn't give off any heat. What about the fire? We can detect the fire that.
And so, I mean, you'll get the idea that essentially that, oh, like there's a dragon, but I can't prove the existence of the dragon. And so, like, okay, let's try to run a few different tests to be able to prove the existence of the dragon, essentially. And then the other person's continue to say, oh, but the dragon has these different properties which make it so that the dragon isn't necessarily real. The thing is that I really hate is that I've definitely just ran into a lot of these people who, like, they think that that's really funny. And I just think that that's ridiculous. Like, just how disingenuous and how inauthentic and how insincere that they are. And I really, and just how much that they're really wasting your time. And if I said something like, dude, like, stop effing with me, then all of a sudden they're going to, or they have had, painted it as if I'm the villain. Oh, it's just a joke. Oh, don't take it too seriously. Oh, come on, man. Like, it's not that deep. This is just a little thing, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, you're too serious and what have you. Effectively trying to frame it as a me problem. Now, where I can take some responsibility with that is that I should have just not been friends with those people. I think it's harder to do that when those people are your boss, for example. But nonetheless, like, or even some of they're your colleagues at work, and your workplace is encouraging you to get along with everyone that you work with. Very frustrating. Very frustrating. I mean, like, I wanted to go in and try to have good relationships with people, but then unfortunately, you run into some of these different people. Like, this is their sense of humor. Some people talk about, like, oh, like, people are having a hard time making friends. Well, one way to make friends is to be able to go and get involved in different activities that are in alignment with your interests. So, say, for example, if you're really interested in comic books and superheroes and what have you, go to a Comic-Con, which I would argue is not really that great of a place to meet because people are I mean, in my own experience, that being said, I haven't been to Comic-Cons in a number of different cities, but generally speaking, people are pretty standoffish. Maybe they just want to, like, take a picture with you. I'm not a cosplayer, so I'll also say that that's a different experience. But there isn't really like social events. And for the most part, people are just minding their own business, doing their own thing, and they're not really looking to make friends. And beyond that, if I even let's say that that was the case and I was able to go and meet other people who had shared interests, that doesn't mean that they have shared values. Therefore, I may run into a situation where I'm with certain people and it's like they are very sarcastic like this. And I consider that to be annoying. They really want to egg on. They really want to hammer it in and get you to believe the lie. And it's almost like I can't win. If I tell them F off and I display that I'm annoyed, then they frame it as if it's my fault. before I get too angry.
That the dragon spits out. Nah, it spits out cold fire. Okay, you see the problem. If there's no way for me to falsify that there's a dragon there, what's the difference between an invisible, floating, heatless dragon and no dragon at all? None. And of course, we can apply this to God or any other supernatural, paranormal type phenomenon. If I can't debunk it, if I can't falsify it, if there's no way to test it, then how will we ever know it's true? This is the
And I mean, one of the things that I find very difficult is that in terms of trying to cooperate with some people in some of these conversations, they're not being cooperative, or especially like in the religion scenario, it's always like, I am never going to accept that God doesn't exist, when talking to some of these people. So it just shows their ignorance. It shows their either if I'm taking them on good faith, their massive ignorance, or their bias, their disingenuousness, their unwavering, their unwillingness to like be authentic. And so I just find that that's very disappointing. And the fact that some people, like I said, would go further to be like, "Oh, you're no fun." It's like, get the F out of here, seriously. The narrow concept of fun being about like being willing to lie about scenarios and reality and what have you, and trying to like pressure people to believe that, and trying to hold your position until you die. Like, I think it's so disgusting. I really do. I do not appreciate that at all.
core of the baloney detection kit. We have to be able to get to whether it's true or not in some way. So it's not just my opinion versus your opinion, and we shout at each other. Then we want to know is, does the claimant's personal belief somehow enter in? Because, of course, we all have personal opinions and beliefs about things. My politics, my religion, my ideology can influence me. It doesn't make it wrong, but it's good to know if somebody.
So, yeah, absolutely. Just in that regard as well, I definitely do agree that someone's personal ideology can influence them as well. There could be a bias with that. Absolutely, it doesn't make them wrong. Absolutely. But I do definitely think that it is a factor that ought to be considered. Like, what does this person have to gain from this? Especially considering that, let's say, back to the religion example, to attack the idea could be it could be construed to attack the individual because they identify with that idea, and in a lot of ways they're not willing to agree or to conclude that they are wrong because of the lifestyle that they built up based off of that identity. I don't think that I'm unwarranted in being misanthropic like that. There's an optimistic part of me, a misanthropist as in a manner of speaking, but I don't think that I am ridiculous or extreme for being misanthropic in that regard. Like, I think that's really annoying. I really do, but nonetheless.
But he has an agenda. So when you watch Fox News, you know that they have an agenda for sure. Or there's other sources on the left that have a liberal agenda, maybe NPR, who knows. But you see, it's good to know that, just in case. So when you hear the fact, you go, well, maybe, but I know this guy has an agenda. So, that's the kind of thing. Does the new idea being proposed account for the same amount of information that the old idea does? And
so just going to be just addressing there that, yeah, definitely people have an agenda. Therefore, they're interacting with you in bad faith. But nonetheless, does the new idea cover as much information as the old idea and
some of the new anomalies that the old idea can't explain? So people offer theories, so-called alternative theories of physics, for example. And they always send them to me going, hey, listen, I'm not good at math, but if you help me with the math, I'll share the Nobel Prize with you. Right. I don't do math and physics, so you might take it to the local high school physics teacher before you announce that you've made the greatest discovery since Newton and Einstein. The problem with that is,
so Yeah, yeah, I think that that's pretty funny, but nonetheless, let's continue.
The current theories do pretty well at explaining most everything. Not everything, so there's always anomalies we can't explain. So maybe there's some new theory coming down the pike that might account for all the old theories, explanations, and the new anomalies, the anomalies that the old theory can't explain. Maybe, but again, we got to be able to test it first. And so those are the kinds of things. Does the claimant play by the rules of science, the rules of the field that you're in, for example? Again,
And I like that. I like using the scientific method, being very skeptical, being willing to have an hypothesis, test the hypothesis, being willing and receptive to new information, and being willing to change your mind based off the newest information that you receive. I think that there's some of the eudaimonia elements of that was present in another episode of Crash Course, and that would be the Crash Course of Philosophy once again. And episode 46, especially, a philosopher. I made a short on this, a philosopher's perspective on how to live a good life and to be able to like achieve happiness in that regard. And so, yeah, like eudaimonia was definitely a part of that, but also just being able to, like, philosophy teaches people to be creative, flexible, and holistic in their vision or thinking, to be a lifelong learner, and to revise your position based on new evidence. And philosophers are convinced that this is the best way to have a good life. And yet, people just on average are just not really like that. So, it be what it be. It's the name of the podcast.
and these alternative physics guys come to me. Don't come to me. I'm not a physicist. Did you at least ask the local high school physics teacher if this makes any sense? Because if you have no training, you don't know all the mistakes that people in the past have already made to get to where they are now. And if you're starting here without the background, you're going to make lots of mistakes. Okay. So these are the sorts of things that any good baloney detector should know.
I've been
Yeah, baloney detector, BS detector, your BS radar, and all of this, that, and the third. So, yeah, I definitely think that there's a lot of merit with that. I really appreciate what Michael Shermer was contributing, as well as also Lawrence Krauss. Really, yeah. I mean, I definitely think that it's. I think it's a shame because I think that there's a lot that we can learn from other people, and yet at the same time, we can't even necessarily. You really have to have a certain amount of trust in those other people to really have productive conversations. This live stream is likely going to go longer than an hour, but I really want to finish this video, and I'm doing pretty well on this one so far. No copyright strikes in that regard, so I am going to keep on going.
messing around with this idea of cognitive dissonance. This is to say, you have a worldview, you're presented with evidence that conflicts with the worldview, so you either have to change your worldview, which is hard because you've lived your whole life with it, or you just dismiss the evidence so that you don't have this discomfort, this conflict in your mind, this dissonance. That's what I'm working with right now. And apparently the way.
And yeah, cognitive dissonance, absolutely. I like the way that he presented that yeah, you don't have this discomfort in your mind. I mean, having someone who smokes cigarettes and then having them quit, essentially, I know some people, like, they really just are addicted, man. They really are. Their dependency really is holding them back in a multitude of different ways, and I think that that's extremely unfortunate, albeit, as I like to say, it be what it be.
Way to overcome that is to say, we're all in this together. Let's learn about this together. Present the conspiracy theorist with the idea that he or she may be rejecting evidence because it's just so uncomfortable. And you're in it together. We're in it together. I'm uncomfortable too. And just understand it's a process. Somebody who has a worldview that's inconsistent with evidence, and I may have some, it takes a while for you to turn around. Like the.
Yeah, and so I agree with that too. Like, changing your worldview is very difficult, and I like where he's about to go with this in terms of how much effort it can really take to change someone's worldview. Some people could perceive, again, the disagreement, like he's saying, be in this together. Like, you basically have to kind of really just tiptoe around the other person's potential sensitivities, for lack of a better word. Like, what I'm trying to get at is that you're trying not to like trigger the other person to the extent that they feel attacked and then they respond with aggression, essentially. And so hence being like, yeah, we're in this together, I'm scared too, kind of thing. But some people just they don't want to show any form of weakness, but whatever, man. Ay, caramba.
Example of palm reading or astrology. It's not something people reverse their ideas about immediately. It takes, in my experience, it takes about 2 years for somebody to sort of look at palm reading, look at cold reading or tarot card reading for a while, and then realize that these tarot card readers, palm readers, are just taking information that you've given them, the client's given them, and feeding it back to you. We all tend to go, well, look at.
So I really agree with that as well. And I think that there's a very interesting notion in terms of what it takes for people to change. And so I'll make sure to discuss that at the end of this live stream. We're definitely going to be going over an hour. I really want to finish this video. So there's 4 reasons why people change. And I'll be getting to that later on, and just generally just why people change. But I just do think that that's a very interesting that's a very interesting concept to also address as well. Oops.
Look at the facts. Change your mind, but it takes people a couple of years to change their mind. So my recommendation, stick with it. You'll get frustrated, the person will get frustrated, but present the idea of cognitive dissonance. This is my latest idea about a way to work together to scientific understanding.
Science doesn't prove what's absolutely true.
So at the very least, like, what it is that I'm going to say on that is that some people may only change if they experience pain. Like, generally people either pursue pleasure or they try to get away from pain, avoid pain, essentially. And so some people, because they're quite principled, they're just going to do whatever it takes for them to get whatever it is that they want. And so, I mean, arguably most people are like that. I mean, Dr. Orion Taraban would declare that that is in fact the case. And so where I take issue with that essentially is that there are a number of different people that I think are really just giving into their lowest impulses. And I think that this is really reminiscent of how animalistic these people are. I think that this is incredibly reminiscent of how animalistic these people are. So they're giving into their lowest impulses, and that essentially they're just they have no principles. You know, they're just doing whatever it takes for them to get whatever it is that they want. And that they're not really going to change unless they run into some sort of pain, essentially. And then they go back onto the path of light, the way that Dr. Orion Taraban describes it. And or maybe some people, they won't change. Maybe they'll just continue to be who they are, and they are not able to handle the change, and effectively they just decide to terminate themselves as a byproduct. I mean, I think that that's unfortunate, but as I like to say, it be what it be, you know? So that's one of the reasons why people change. Pain, for sure. I do think that there is more to it than that. However, I do also think it makes a lot of sense that just some people they just really don't have principles. So
True. What it does is prove what's absolutely. Science doesn't prove what's absolutely true. What it does is prove what's absolutely false. What doesn't satisfy the test of experiment, we throw out. What remains may not be true, but we shrink it down, as Sherlock Holmes would say, and what remains after all of that is done is likely to be true. So many sources question what you see and whether it's consistent with
So yeah, I like that because I think that there's a lot in terms of the human experience where we are discovering more and more of what is in fact true, essentially, and that we don't have it all figured out. We won't ever have it all figured out in our lifetime. We're not at the end of history, essentially, but we are getting closer and closer to figuring it out, essentially. And that's what I think is very beautiful about the human experience and just living as a human being. However, and I do think that there's a lot about, like they were saying, talking to people who disagree with you, particularly what Michael Shermer was saying about talking to people who disagree with you. However, as I've been mentioning, I think that there's a lot of issues with that, and that I do think that we are trending upwards for sure. However, some of it's particularly slow, just like Bill Nye was saying, and some people won't change their mind for 2 years. It's like changing your mind is like having a container ship on the water and trying to turn that. So
with what you already know, and be suspicious of your own likes and dislikes when you accept information. That's probably the reason we shouldn't, when we turn to the internet, go to echo chambers and just read the sources that we like. Now, having said that, if you look at many sources, you can also quickly decide which ones are not reliable and throw them out. If they're not reliable in one case, then you should be highly suspicious of them in the future. So we all turn to different sources that we
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, just not staying in an echo chamber, absolutely. Otherwise, you're always going to be thinking that you're right. Essentially, I think that once again, it can be very difficult to not be in an echo chamber because of the what I would deem to be the barbaric way that we handle disagreements as humans. I think that it's exceptionally barbaric for the most part. I hope that that gets better, but we'll see, But nonetheless, I definitely do think that it is important to look up conflicting evidence as well, as Lawrence Krauss is asserting.
think are more or less reliable based on our past experience. Try that, and I think it's one great way to filter out a lot of the nonsense on the internet. When I talk about being skeptical,
There's also I just wanted to also add in that people tend to generally have this level of pride in them being correct and thinking that they're right, and virtually thinking that they know everything, and that if they were to be proven wrong, that's like an embarrassment towards them. Again, like that's an attack. Disagreement is considered as an attack. They don't like to be challenged. It's as if they're being personally attacked, that like their intelligence is being attacked, as if they interpret that they don't know what they're talking about or what have you. All of that, which I think is very, very, very unfortunate. And I think that that just holds people back. But again, this is the Homo sapien animal. So I think that people hold themselves back in that regard as well.
it is important to recognize that you can be surprised, and something that you don't think is sensible can end up being sensible. That's the way we learn things in physics. So when someone presents you with an idea that may seem strange, it's reasonable to be skeptical of it, but it's worth pursuing long enough to see if it might make sense, and to listen.
And so, yeah, absolutely, I do agree with that. I mean, there's a lot of different like minority ideas that ended up now being the mainstream. I mean, Netflix. People laughed at Netflix. Apple stores, people laughed at that. Just thinking that even online dating used to be the minority. Now this is like the most common way that people meet, essentially. So it seemed very strange at first, but now this has become very mainstream, and I think that that's ridiculous. Well, I just think that there is a warranted skepticism to it, but I also think that it's just really ridiculous to like immediately shut it down because it's unpopular, for example. So that being said,
Listen to arguments that might be convincing, that might cause you to change your mind. In fact, there's a great school of pedagogy that says the only way we actually learn anything is by confronting our own misconceptions. So once again, while it's reasonable to be skeptical of external information, if you're always skeptical of your response to information, then and what your misconceptions are and what your prejudices are.
And I think that that's very important as well. Like, being able to know yourself, know what your biases are, know what your know what the elements of yourself are that would make you quite skeptical to the information as well. I think that that's very important.
Then you will both guide yourself not to accept nonsense, but also you will be willing to realize that sometimes what you think is skepticism is really myopia. Where I think...
Ooh, and okay, so I'm just going to mute that. And yeah, so it's just an ad for BetterHelp as well. But I am actually just going to look up that word myopia just to make sure that myopia. Let's see what it means. Yeah, myopia meaning. I don't want to switch the tab because I've done that before and it's had an impact on my sound, but nonetheless, nearsightedness is a common vision condition in which close objects look clear, but far objects look blurry. The medical term for nearsightedness is myopia. Myopia happens when the shape of the eye or the shape of certain parts of the eye causes light rays to bend or refract. But like, yeah, being nearsighted, being short-sighted, essentially. Yeah, being short-sighted, essentially. Yeah, that like a lot of your own biases, your own perspectives, your own values, they can really cause you to be very myopic. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Darren Brown.
Skepticism in its broad, modern, popular sense of just, don't believe in God, don't believe in this, don't believe in that. Where I think it has its limits, and I speak very much as a skeptic myself and as an atheist, as I said, where it is important to realize the edges of its usefulness is where those things that may not be objectively true, but can be psychologically.
So interesting in that, just to hear that, like, him now trying to address the limitations of skepticism. So where it might not be, well, I'll just rewind it a bit.
Where those things that may not be objectively true, but can be psychologically true, in inverted commas. In other words, psychologically resonant to, the path of living and what we take in life and what's important to us and what's helpful. So that's what you don't want to throw out. You don't want to throw out that baby with the bathwater. So in religion, for example, those things that are easily knocked down if you're
So yeah, very interesting in terms of what may be objectively true versus what may be psychologically true. And even though it's not objectively true, it may be psychologically true. Okay, so let's hear what he has to say and let him continue to speak.
You're an atheist, they're easy to kind of make fun of and disprove. Those things are also, they're kind of often are straw men to knock down, but they can often be pointers back to something that is psychologically useful. They're signifiers of something. If you take what happens with religion is that you have a something that happens, an experience of transcendence or a kind of
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I do think that there's certain factors such as like coming back from the dead, such as, Moses walking on water, splitting the Red Sea, turning water into wine, for example, creating a woman from the rib of a man. Like there's a number of those different factors that I do think that are very, as someone who is pursues a secular lifestyle, very ridiculous, but nonetheless.
a thing that happened historically, nothing magical or supernatural, but just for people at that time, a connection to a sense of the transcendent, whatever that was, a message or something. And then as that moves out of living memory to recreate it, a bunch of practices and dogmas and things are formed to try and recreate that feeling. And that becomes now a thing of belief rather than a sort of knowledge that it was at the time. And then to
Very interesting. Yeah, but like there's a lot more to what it is that he has to say, so I'm just going to let him continue. Just try not to get copyright stricken.
Sustain and protect that belief, an institution is sort of created and developed and becomes politicized and powerful and monetized and all of those things. And then it moves into a world where we are nowadays, where things have to be sort of proved with evidence. So it starts to try and come up with evidential arguments that somehow never quite really sort of work. So you do end up with a thing that's easy to knock down, but that can miss the fact that there's something at the heart of it which maybe is useful.
So yeah, that like there could be a belief that's psychologically true, but not necessarily objectively true. But yeah, definitely in terms of like religion, that in order to protect the belief, then they start to institutionalize it and enshrine it into law. And then they make it even political, add money to it. And so it basically makes the belief, it creates a power structure around the belief. And that's able to, yeah, like they say, protect the belief, as it were. I think it's very interesting. I think that's very much so very indicative of just how some of these beliefs have become very, very relevant in the modern day. But nonetheless, we have less than a minute to go. Almost there.
Maybe those narratives around religion are useful to us psychologically. Maybe they have an archetypal or a mythological use that it would be a shame to dismiss because we feel the absence of those things. It's the very fact we turn to psychics and fortune tellers and become terrified and lonely around death. Those things happen because we've lost touch with some of those myths and some of those more resonant narratives. So I think,
and in generally, like I do think that there is quite a bit of merit in some of what religion has to say. I really like the 7 deadly sins. In fact, I would even add an 8th one, which would be entitlement, because no one owes you anything and you don't deserve anything really at all. And beyond that, to treat others the way that you want to be treated as well. I definitely think that there's a lot of merit to a lot of religions, especially how, when I was saying before that people don't necessarily have a series of principles that they are willing to abide by. Religion is a way of being able to establish a series of principles that make it so that people abide by those series of principles. Religion definitely is one of those ways, and so I've certainly heard about religion being created to control people. And initially I was thinking, oh, like, I don't really like the sound of that. That kind of sucks. But I kind of do at this rate, especially with the more and more that I learn about people. And like I say, how they're willing to go to what I would assert as their lowest impulses to just do whatever it takes to get what they want without necessarily having like any principles associated with that. Arguably, you could say values, morals, or ethics, or at least their values are do whatever it takes to get what they want. They're willing to sacrifice their integrity for the sake of being more comfortable, getting more of what it is that they want, essentially, and taking the easy way out, among other factors. Because oftentimes we hear what doing the right thing is generally harder and not doing the right thing is generally easier, essentially. And while I'm not going to say that there's like objective right and wrong in certain instances, I will say that certainly generally speaking, good habits are hard in the beginning, but they make your life easier, and bad habits are easier in the beginning, but they make your life harder. So substance abuse and addiction versus like trying to implement the gym into your schedule, for example. So to give you 2 different examples there, but nonetheless, let's finish this off.
I think being a little skeptical about skepticism itself and the easy narratives that it forms is also, I think, very useful.
Get smarter faster with new videos every week from the world's biggest thinkers.
So yeah, I mean that came from the.
You know what happens when you become very comfortable with the pause? All of your non-words and your filler words, meaning all the ums, the ahs, they all start.
forget this because I really don't care. I mean, kind of, but nonetheless, I definitely think that there is a lot of merit to this, so I'm going to give this a like for sure. And as I was saying, this is approaching on being 4 years older, so thank you very much to the speakers and all of that. And yeah, you can literally see the transcript over there. So by all means, feel free to take a look at that whenever you like. But then the last part that I was going to add in was the 4 reasons why people change. And so, according to leadership expert John Maxwell, people change when they are heard enough they have to, see enough they are inspired to, learn enough they want to, and receive enough they are able to. Essentially, meaning change is driven by significant pain, inspiration from others, personal learning, and the support needed to enact that change. Breakdown of the 4 reasons. So, hurt enough when they have to, when the current situation becomes so painful or detrimental that change becomes necessary to alleviate suffering. I've certainly been in some of these situations. Like, I really didn't like the circumstances so much that I just wanted to change. I didn't really even care that the grass was greener on the other side. I just wanted to change because the situation that I was in was so bad. They see enough they are inspired to. So, witnessing positive examples or role models that demonstrate the possibility of change, motivating a person to strive for something better, and so inspiration by all means. Learn enough that they want to, acquiring knowledge and understanding about a better way of doing things, creating a desire for personal growth and change, and receive enough that they are able to, having the necessary support, resources, and encouragement from others to facilitate the change process. Generally speaking, like, I want to move to a wherever other country because I have the resources to be able to do so. Say, for example, I want to change jobs because I have the resources to do so. Or I want to quit this job because I can go back in with my family or what have you, for example. So all of this is just to say, you know, I think that there's definitely more to the way that people change than just being hurt, essentially. In some people's experience, people generally change mostly because of pain. Some people would say, like, I know Philip DeFranco, he says that he doesn't believe that adults would change without trauma. Otherwise, maybe then they just try to figure out different ways to get what it is that they want, and they didn't really change a core value of theirs, and so it really makes a lot more sense to me why we would have like a prison system essentially, and that punishment is used because inspiration isn't enough. Some people, they just won't change, they just don't want to. I think that some people are very deplorable in that regard, even though they're not criminal. Like, they don't care what effect that their behavior is having towards another person, particularly if it's detrimental. It's one thing to say that, like, change for someone else so that, like, say for example, you change your sense of humor. I mean, like, I'm not necessarily like, let me try something else. Changing, let's say, someone's like fashion, for example, to make someone else comfortable, for example. I wouldn't necessarily say that. But again, like, if someone's like being particularly so sarcastic, and even deadpanning and really trying to plant their feet in their position and really trying to convince the other person of the lie, you know, I think that that's ridiculous. That, like, it's almost essentially trying to force someone to like your sense of humor and then shaming them for not liking your sense of humor. Like, you know. So, with that being said, I do think that there's these different methods that people would change. I do think that there's more to it than just the pain, but nonetheless, as I like to say, it be what it be. That's the name of the podcast. I hope that you enjoy your weekend. And I'm going to be coming back with a part 2. And that is right. Actually, I may actually just go back to YouTube. I'm going to be coming back to a part 2 to a new series that I have, the content reactions, even though I'm arguably already reacting to content. But right now, I am trying to talk more about I'm trying to do more like lessons and talking about philosophical ideas over here, and then content reactions. The Avoid People, that is a new series that I am doing, and so I very much so encourage y'all to check that out as well. And I'm going to be doing a part 2 of that one, which I am hoping to do on Monday, but we'll see, Monday or Tuesday, but we'll see how we go. That being said, it be what it be. Thank you very much for joining us for yet another live stream and for checking out this video. And I wish you all the best. Yes. All right.